Marcus Sterling adjusted his Italian silk tie as his private jet touched down at the familiar airport. After 3 years of building his empire across Europe and Asia, he was finally coming home. The 35-year-old billionaire had left as a struggling entrepreneur with big dreams. Now he returned as one of the youngest tech moguls in the world, his revolutionary software having changed how people communicated globally. But success had come at a price. Long days, endless meetings, and constant travel had kept him away from everything he once knew. His phone buzzed with congratulations from business partners and invitations to exclusive events, yet Marcus felt strangely empty. Money could buy many things, but it couldn't fill the void where his family used to be. As his black limousine pulled through the gates of his childhood neighborhood, memories flooded back. This wasn't just any return home. This was where he had grown up after losing his parents in a car accident when he was 12. This was where Dorothy Mae Johnson had opened her heart and home to a broken, angry boy who had nowhere else to go. Dorothy wasn't his biological mother, but she had been everything a mother should be. A 60-year-old black woman who worked 2 jobs to support herself, she had somehow found room in her life for Marcus. Her small house on Maple Street had become his sanctuary. Her warm kitchen had been where he did his homework while she cooked dinner. Her gentle wisdom had guided him through his teenage years when the world felt too big and scary to handle alone. The limousine stopped in front of a magnificent mansion that Marcus had purchased 2 years ago as a surprise for Dorothy. He had bought it through lawyers, wanting to remain anonymous until he could present it to her in person. The house was everything she deserved, spacious, elegant, with a beautiful garden and all the modern conveniences she had never been able to afford. Marcus stepped out of the car, his expensive shoes clicking against the stone pathway. He had imagined this moment countless times. He would knock on the door, Dorothy would open it with her usual warm smile, and he would finally be able to repay her for all the love she had given him. He would tell her about his success, about how her belief in him had made it all possible. But, as he approached the front door, something felt wrong. The house looked too perfect, too untouched. The garden, while beautiful, seemed professionally maintained rather than lovingly tended. Dorothy had always been passionate about her flowers, spending hours nurturing her small garden behind her old house. This garden looked like it had never felt a caring hand. Marcus rang the doorbell, his heart pounding with anticipation and nervous energy. Footsteps approached from inside, but they weren't the slow, careful steps he remembered from Dorothy. These were quick, sharp clicks of high heels against marble floors. The door swung open, revealing a woman Marcus barely recognized as his wife. Victoria Sterling stood before him in an expensive designer dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite it being mid-afternoon on a Tuesday. She looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine, but her expression was cold and unwelcoming. "Marcus," she said flatly, not moving to embrace him or even smile. "You're early." "Victoria," Marcus replied, confused by her distant greeting. They had been married for 5 years, though the last 3 had been spent mostly apart due to his business commitments. He had hoped that his return would mark a new beginning for their relationship. "I wanted to surprise you." "And, Dorothy? Where is she?" Victoria stepped aside reluctantly, allowing him to enter the grand foyer. The house was decorated with expensive art and furniture, everything arranged perfectly as if for a magazine photo shoot. But it felt cold and unwelcoming, nothing like the warm, lived-in feeling that Dorothy's old house had possessed. "Dorothy?" Victoria repeated, her voice carrying a strange tone that Marcus couldn't quite identify. "Oh, she's around somewhere. Probably in the kitchen area." Marcus frowned. Something in Victoria's manner made him uncomfortable. During their phone calls over the past 2 years, Victoria had always been vague when he asked about Dorothy. She would say things like she's fine or she's adjusting well, but never provided details. Marcus had attributed this to Victoria never being particularly close to Dorothy, but now he sensed something more troubling. "I'd like to see her," Marcus said, starting toward what he assumed was the kitchen area. "I have so much to tell her about the business, about everything that's happened." "Wait," Victoria called out, her voice sharp. "Maybe you should freshen up first. You've had a long flight." We can catch up, and then, later. No, Marcus interrupted, something in his wife's behavior setting off alarm bells. I want to see Dorothy now. I've been away too long. He walked through the house, noting how every surface gleamed with expensive polish, how every room looked like a showpiece rather than a home. As he approached the back of the house, he began to hear sounds from the kitchen, the clatter of dishes, running water, and humming. The humming was familiar, an old spiritual that Dorothy used to sing while she cooked. Marcus smiled for the first time since arriving, his heart warming at the familiar sound. But, as he rounded the corner into the kitchen, his smile died on his lips. Dorothy was there, but she wasn't the woman he expected to find. Instead of being the lady of the house, enjoying the comfortable retirement he had planned for her, she was standing at the sink washing dishes. She wore a simple housekeeping uniform, her hair covered with a plain scarf, her hands red and wrinkled from hot water and cleaning chemicals. For a moment, Marcus couldn't process what he was seeing. This was supposed to be Dorothy's house, her reward for all the years of sacrifice and love she had given him. But she looked like hired help. Dorothy, he said softly, his voice barely a whisper. She turned around, and, when she saw him, her face lit up with the same warm, loving smile he remembered from his childhood. But there were new lines around her eyes, a tiredness in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. She was now 73 years old, and the years had been harder on her than Marcus had imagined. Marcus, she exclaimed, dropping the dish towel and rushing toward him with arms outstretched. My boy. You're home. She wrapped him in a fierce hug, and Marcus felt like a child again, safe in the arms of the only mother he had really known. But, even as he hugged her back, his mind was racing with questions. Why was she washing dishes in her own kitchen? Why was she dressed like a servant in her own home? I've missed you so much, Dorothy said, pulling back to look at him with tears in her eyes. You look so handsome, so successful. I'm so proud of you, baby. Dorothy, Marcus began, but he was interrupted by Victoria's voice from behind him. Dorothy, you shouldn't be bothering Mr. Sterling when he's just arrived home, Victoria said coldly. He's had a long trip and needs to rest. Please finish cleaning the kitchen and then you can go to your room. Marcus spun around, staring at his wife in disbelief. Her room? Victoria, what are you talking about? This is Dorothy's house. I bought it for her. Victoria's perfectly composed mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. Oh Marcus, you're so naive about these things. Dorothy is much happier with a structured arrangement. She has a nice room in the service quarters, regular meals, and meaningful work to keep her busy. It's really the best situation for someone of her background. The way Victoria said background made Marcus's blood run cold. There was something dismissive and cruel in her tone, something that suggested she looked down on Dorothy not just as a person, but for reasons that made Marcus sick to even consider. Service quarters? Marcus repeated, his voice rising. Victoria, this house was supposed to be Dorothy's home. I bought it for her to live in, to enjoy her retirement in comfort. And she is comfortable, Victoria replied smoothly, but Marcus could see the calculation in her eyes. She has everything she needs. A roof over her head, food, medical care. Really, Marcus, you're being emotional about this. I've managed everything very efficiently while you were away building your empire. Marcus looked between his wife and Dorothy, seeing the situation with new eyes. Dorothy stood quietly, her head slightly bowed, her hands clasped in front of her. She wasn't acting like a woman in her own home. She was acting like a servant who had been caught in a place she didn't belong. Dorothy, Marcus said gently, tell me the truth. How have you been living here? Dorothy glanced nervously at Victoria before looking back at Marcus. I'm fine, baby. Mrs. Sterling has been kind to let me stay. Kind to let you stay? Marcus exploded. Dorothy, this is your house. I bought it for you. Marcus, please lower your voice, Victoria said sharply. You're upsetting Dorothy. And you don't understand how things work. I've been managing this household while you've been playing businessman around the world. Dorothy needed structure, guidance. Left to her own devices, she would have been overwhelmed by a house this size. Something in Victoria's tone, the condescending way she spoke about Dorothy, made Marcus see his wife clearly for perhaps the first time. This woman he had married, this beautiful, sophisticated woman from his social circle, had revealed something about her character that made him feel physically ill. "Get out," Marcus said quietly. "What?" Victoria blinked, clearly not expecting this response. "Get out of this kitchen. Leave us alone." Marcus's voice was controlled, but there was steel underneath that made Victoria take a step backward. "Marcus, you're being ridiculous. We need to talk about get out." Marcus roared, and Victoria hurried from the room, her high heels clicking rapidly against the floor. When they were alone, Marcus turned back to Dorothy, who was watching him with worried eyes. "Dorothy, please. Tell me what's really been happening here. How long have you been working as a servant in your own home?" Dorothy sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly, looking every one of her 73 years. "Oh Marcus," she said softly, "I didn't want to worry you. You were so busy, so successful. I didn't want to be a burden." "A burden?" Marcus knelt beside her chair, taking her work-worn hands in his. "Dorothy, you could never be a burden. You're the reason I am who I am today. Without you, I would have been lost. Tell me everything. Please." And, slowly, with tears rolling down her cheeks, Dorothy began to tell him the truth about what his homecoming had really brought him back to discover. Dorothy's voice shook as she began to share the truth that she had kept hidden for 2 long years. Marcus listened in growing horror as the woman who had raised him revealed the reality of what had happened after he left for his business ventures abroad. "When the lawyers first came to tell me about the house," Dorothy began, her weathered hands trembling slightly, "I couldn't believe it. I thought there had been some mistake. A house like this, for someone like me? But they had all the papers, said it was a gift from an anonymous benefactor who wanted to thank me for my service to the community." Marcus felt a pang of regret. He had wanted the gift to be a surprise, to remain anonymous until he could reveal himself as the benefactor in person. Now he realized how his good intentions had created a situation that Victoria could manipulate. "I moved in 6 months after you left for Europe," Dorothy continued. "It was like a dream come true. I had my own beautiful bedroom, a bathroom bigger than my old kitchen, and that garden, oh Marcus, that garden was going to be my pride and joy." Her eyes grew distant as she remembered those first few weeks in the mansion. "I spent my days exploring every room, planning how I would use the space. I thought maybe I could have some of the neighborhood children over, teach them to bake like I taught you. Maybe start a little community garden. I had so many plans. What happened?" Marcus asked gently, though he was beginning to piece together the story from Dorothy's tone and his observations of Victoria's behavior. "Your wife came to visit about 2 months after I moved in. She was so beautiful, so elegant. I was excited to finally meet her properly. We had only met briefly at your wedding, and she had been polite but distant then. I thought maybe we could become friends, or at least family." Dorothy paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Victoria told me she was concerned about me living alone in such a big house. She said you had asked her to check on me while you were away, to make sure I was managing okay. At first, I was grateful. It had been lonely, and the house was much bigger than anything I was used to." Marcus felt his chest tightening as he anticipated what was coming next. "She started visiting more frequently, bringing suggestions about how to properly maintain a house of this caliber. She said I needed to understand that living here came with certain responsibilities, certain standards that had to be met. She brought in professional cleaners and told me I shouldn't interfere with their work. Then, she started pointing out things I was doing wrong. My cooking was too simple for such an elegant kitchen. My clothes weren't appropriate for receiving the kind of visitors who might come to a house like this. My furniture from my old place looked shabby and out of place." Marcus remembered Dorothy's old furniture, nothing fancy, but each piece carefully chosen and lovingly maintained. Her old rocking chair where she used to sit and read to him. Her grandmother's china cabinet. the kitchen table where they had shared countless meals together. These weren't just pieces of furniture, they were Dorothy's history, her identity. She convinced me to let her store my old furniture in the basement temporarily while she helped me furnish the house appropriately. She brought in an interior designer who chose everything you see now. Beautiful, expensive, but nothing felt like mine. Dorothy's voice grew smaller as she continued. Gradually, Victoria's visits became longer. She would stay for days at a time, managing the household, dealing with delivery people and service providers. She said it was too much for me to handle, that I didn't understand how to deal with people of quality. The racial undertones in Victoria's behavior were becoming clearer to Marcus, and he felt sick. He had never seen this side of his wife before, but then, again, he realized with growing shame, he had never really put her in a position where her true character would be revealed. Then, about 18 months ago, Victoria told me that you were having financial difficulties with your business. She showed me official-looking documents that said the house might have to be sold unless alternative arrangements could be made. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. Dorothy, that was never true. My business has been successful from the very beginning. Those documents were fake. I know that now, baby, Dorothy said sadly. But, at the time, I was so worried about you. Victoria said there was a way to save the house and help you at the same time. She said wealthy people sometimes needed to restructure their assets for tax purposes, and that if I agreed to let her take legal ownership of the house temporarily, it would protect you from your creditors. She had me sign papers that I thought were temporary guardianship documents. She explained that I would continue living in the house, but that on paper, I would be employed as a housekeeper and caretaker. She said it was just a legal fiction to protect the property, and that when your financial troubles were resolved, everything would go back to normal. Marcus felt like he might be sick. The sophistication of Victoria's manipulation was breathtaking in its cruelty. She had preyed on Dorothy's love for him, her trust, her unfamiliarity with legal documents, and her desire to help. But things didn't go back to normal, Dorothy continued. Once the papers were signed, Victoria's attitude changed completely. She told me that as the legal owner of the house, she had certain standards to maintain. She moved into the master bedroom and I was relocated to a small room in what used to be the servants' quarters. She brought in new household rules. I was to wear the uniform she provided. I was to address her as Mrs. Sterling at all times. I was not to use the main living areas when she or her guests were present. My meals were to be taken in the kitchen, and I was expected to maintain the house to her exacting standards. Marcus was shaking with rage, but he forced himself to stay calm for Dorothy's sake. Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you tell me what was happening? Dorothy looked at him with the infinite sadness of someone who had experienced a lifetime of discrimination and diminished expectations. Baby, Victoria showed me newspaper articles about your success, pictures of you at fancy parties and business meetings. You were living in a world I could never understand, achieving things I had always dreamed you would achieve. She told me that you had grown beyond your humble beginnings, that you needed to be surrounded by people who could match your new status. She said that if you knew I was having trouble adjusting to my new circumstances, it would distract you from your important work. But, more than that, Dorothy's voice dropped to a whisper, she made me believe that this was what I deserved. She had ways of making me feel small, of reminding me that I was just an old black woman who had gotten above her station. She never said it directly, but the message was clear in everything she did. Marcus felt tears burning his eyes as he understood the psychological warfare Victoria had waged against the woman who had been more of a mother to him than anyone else in the world. Dorothy, none of that is true. None of it. You are the most important person in my life. You raised me, you believed in me when no one else did. You deserve everything good in this world. I know that now, seeing you here, seeing how you look at me, Dorothy said, reaching up to touch his face. But, living it day after day, being reminded constantly that I was staff, not family, it wears on you. It changes how you see yourself. Tell me about your daily life here, Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I need to know everything. Dorothy sighed deeply. I wake up at 5:30 every morning to prepare breakfast for Victoria and any guests she might have. Usually it's catered affairs now. She says my cooking isn't sophisticated enough for her entertaining needs. But I still do the basic meal preparation, the cleaning up afterward. I clean the house from top to bottom twice a week, with daily maintenance cleaning in between. The professional service comes once a month for deep cleaning, but Victoria says it's my job to maintain their standards daily. I do the laundry, iron her clothes, manage the household supplies. What about your own time? Your own life? Marcus asked. I'm allowed 2 hours of personal time each afternoon, provided all my duties are completed and Victoria doesn't have guests. Usually I spend that time in the garden, but I'm only allowed to tend the areas that aren't visible from the main windows. Victoria had the landscape designers create the showcase areas that guests see. Marcus thought about the beautiful but sterile garden he had noticed when he arrived. Dorothy's touch was missing from the areas that mattered most to her. I have Thursday afternoons off, from 2 to 6 p.m., to run personal errands or attend church. Victoria drives me to and from wherever I need to go, saying it's for insurance purposes since I'm not covered to drive the household vehicles. The level of control was staggering. Victoria had systematically isolated Dorothy from any independence, any dignity, any connection to the outside world that might have given her perspective on how abnormal her situation had become. What about money? Are you getting paid for this work? Dorothy looked embarrassed. Victoria says my salary goes toward household expenses, my room, meals, medical insurance. She gives me $50 a week for personal expenses, but she has to approve any purchases over $20. Marcus's hands were shaking now. $50 a week for the woman who had worked 2 jobs to keep him fed and housed during his teenage years. $50 a week for the woman he had intended to live in luxury for the rest of her life. Dorothy, do you understand that this house legally belongs to you? Whatever papers Victoria had you sign, they don't change the fact that I purchased this house in your name. You own this property. Dorothy looked confused and frightened. But the papers she showed me said the papers were fake, or at best, they were documents that she had no legal right to present to you. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling my lawyers and we're going to straighten this out. But tonight, you're going to sleep in the master bedroom where you belong. Oh no, Marcus, Dorothy said quickly, fear evident in her voice. Victoria wouldn't like that. She has very strict rules about. Victoria doesn't make the rules here, Marcus said firmly. You do. This is your house, Dorothy. Not hers. Yours. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of high heels on marble announced Victoria's return to the kitchen. She appeared in the doorway, having clearly taken time to refresh her makeup and compose herself. Marcus, I think there's been enough dramatics for one evening, she said with forced lightness. Why don't we let Dorothy finish her work while we go upstairs and talk privately? I'm sure once I explain the situation properly, you'll understand that everything I've done has been in everyone's best interests. Marcus stood up slowly, his eyes never leaving his wife's face. When he spoke, his voice was calm but filled with a cold fury that made Victoria take an involuntary step backward. The only conversation we're going to have tonight, Victoria, is the one where you explain to me how you thought it was acceptable to turn the woman who raised me into a servant in her own home. And that conversation is going to happen right here, right now, in front of Dorothy. Because unlike you, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger, I don't have any secrets from the woman who gave me everything when I had nothing. So start talking. And start with the truth. The mask was finally coming off, and Marcus was about to discover just how far his wife had been willing to go to transform kindness into cruelty, and love into something that would make him question everything he thought he knew about the woman he had married. Victoria's carefully composed facade began to crack under Marcus's intense stare. For the first time since his return, she seemed to realize that her husband wasn't going to be easily manipulated or distracted from the truth. She glanced between Marcus and Dorothy, calculating her next move. Marcus, you're being incredibly naive, Victoria finally said, her voice taking on a condescending tone. You've been living in a bubble of boardrooms and luxury hotels. You don't understand the practical realities of managing a household like this. Then, educate me, Marcus replied coldly. Explain to me how practical realities justified turning Dorothy into a servant. Victoria moved further into the kitchen, her designer dress and perfect makeup a stark contrast to Dorothy in her simple uniform. When you left Dorothy in charge of this house, you created an impossible situation. She had no experience managing a property of this value, no understanding of the social obligations that come with a residence in this neighborhood. Social obligations? Marcus repeated. Yes, social obligations, Victoria snapped, her patience clearly wearing thin. This house isn't just a building, Marcus. It's a statement about who we are, about our place in society. The kind of people we need to associate with, the kind of entertaining we need to do to maintain your business relationships, none of that was possible with Dorothy playing house here. Dorothy flinched as if she had been physically struck, and Marcus felt his anger reach a boiling point. But he forced himself to stay calm, to let Victoria continue revealing her true nature. Within weeks of moving in, Dorothy was already creating problems, Victoria continued, seemingly oblivious to the impact of her words. She invited that woman from her old neighborhood, some church friend, over for tea. Can you imagine? This woman showed up in a 15-year-old car, wearing a dress from Walmart, sitting in our formal living room commenting on the fancy furniture. Our living room? Marcus asked quietly. You know what I mean, Victoria said dismissively. The point is, Dorothy had no sense of boundaries. She was treating this place like some kind of community center. She wanted to host a church bake sale fundraiser here, Marcus. A bake sale. In a house worth $12 million. Marcus remembered Dorothy's love for community events, how she had always been the first to volunteer for church activities, how she had organized neighborhood gatherings in her small home. Those weren't character flaws, they were the qualities that made her special. So you decided to put her in her place, Marcus said. I decided to create structure, Victoria corrected. Dorothy needed guidance about appropriate behavior for someone in her position. I helped her understand that this house came with responsibilities, with standards that needed to be maintained. By making her a servant. By giving her a role that suited her capabilities, Victoria shot back, and, there it was, the ugly truth finally, spoken aloud. Marcus, be honest with yourself. Dorothy is a lovely woman, I'm sure, but she's not equipped for the lifestyle you've achieved. She's more comfortable in a service role anyway. It's what she knows, what she's good at. Dorothy had been sitting quietly during this exchange, but now she spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. I worked as a housekeeper for 40 years before I retired, Victoria. But I was never anyone's servant. There's a difference. Victoria whirled around to face Dorothy, her mask slipping completely. Well, maybe if you had known your place from the beginning, we wouldn't have had these problems. Maybe if you hadn't gotten ideas above your station, thinking you could just waltz into a house like this and play lady of the manor enough. Marcus's voice exploded through the kitchen with such force that both women jumped. That's enough, Victoria. I've heard all I need to hear. Victoria seemed to realize she had gone too far. She took a deep breath and tried to regain her composure. Marcus, I know this sounds harsh, but someone had to make the difficult decisions while you were building your empire. Dorothy was in over her head. I was trying to help her. Help her? Marcus laughed bitterly. You were helping her by stealing her home? By forging documents to make her sign away her rights? By isolating her from her friends and treating her like property? I never stop lying, Marcus interrupted. Dorothy told me about the fake financial documents you showed her. About how you convinced her that signing ownership over to you would somehow help me. About how you moved her into the servants' quarters of her own home. Victoria's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. You don't understand the legal complexities involved. I was protecting our assets, protecting you from potential liability issues. What liability issues? What are you talking about? Victoria hesitated, and Marcus could see her mind working, trying to construct a believable excuse. If something happened to Dorothy while she was living here alone, if she fell, if she had a medical emergency, you could have been held responsible. By restructuring the arrangement, by having proper oversight, by having oversight? Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. Is that what you call monitoring her mail? Controlling her money? Deciding who she can see and when she can leave the house? Dorothy looked up in surprise. How did you know about? Because I know Victoria, Marcus said, his eyes never leaving his wife's face. I'm beginning to understand exactly who I married. Tell me, Victoria, what did you do with Dorothy's friends from church? The ones who stopped coming to visit? Victoria's silence was answer enough, but Marcus pressed on. Did you tell them Dorothy was too busy? Too tired? That she preferred not to have visitors? How did you isolate her from everyone who cared about her? I was protecting the household's privacy, Victoria said defensively. Dorothy's social circle wasn't appropriate for what? For a black woman living in a white neighborhood? Is that what you mean? The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Victoria's face went pale, then flushed red. How dare you suggest that then, tell me I'm wrong, Marcus challenged. Tell me that Dorothy's race had nothing to do with how you treated her. Tell me that you would have done the same thing if she had been a white woman. Victoria opened and closed her mouth several times, but no words came out. Her silence was more damning than any confession could have been. Oh my God, Marcus said quietly, the full scope of his wife's cruelty finally becoming clear. You didn't just see an opportunity to steal a house. You saw a chance to put an elderly black woman in her place. You enjoyed it, didn't you? You enjoyed having power over her. That's not, Victoria started, but her voice cracked. You enjoyed making her call you Mrs. Sterling while you called her by her first name. You enjoyed making her wear a uniform while you dressed in designer clothes. You enjoyed having her serve you meals while you ate in the dining room and she ate in the kitchen. With each accusation, Victoria seemed to shrink smaller, but Marcus wasn't finished. You enjoyed proving to yourself that no matter how much money I made, no matter how successful I became, the woman who raised me was still just a servant in your eyes. Stop it, Victoria whispered, but there was no real denial in her voice. And the worst part, Marcus continued, his voice filled with disgust, is that you convinced Dorothy she deserved it. You made her believe that she was lucky to be here, that she should be grateful for your cruelty. Dorothy reached out and touched Marcus's arm gently. Baby, it's okay. I survived. I'm still here. Marcus turned to look at the woman who had raised him, seeing clearly for the first time how much the past 2 years had cost her. The confident, vibrant woman who had worked 2 jobs and still found energy to help him with homework was still there, but she had been diminished, made smaller by constant psychological warfare. No, Dorothy, it's not okay. None of this is okay. He turned back to Victoria, who was now crying, though whether from genuine remorse or fear of consequences, Marcus couldn't tell. I want you to pack your things, he said quietly. Tonight. I want you out of this house. Marcus, please, Victoria said, her voice suddenly desperate. We can work this out. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Think about what a divorce would do to your reputation, to your business relationships. Think about the scandal. I'm thinking about it, Marcus replied. And, you know what I realize? I don't care. I'd rather be known as a man who divorced a woman for being cruel than as a man who stayed married to someone who could treat Dorothy this way. But, our life together, our future, we don't have a future, Victoria. We never did. Because I'm learning that I never really knew who you were. Victoria looked around the kitchen desperately, as if searching for some argument that might save her. Her eyes fell on Dorothy, and, for a moment, Marcus thought she might actually apologize, might show some genuine remorse for what she had done. Instead, her face hardened with a kind of vicious desperation. Fine, she said, her voice turning cold again. Throw away your marriage for her. But, don't think this is over, Marcus. You might be rich, but you're still just a poor boy who was raised by the help. And, eventually, people will see you for what you really are. The slur hit its mark, and Marcus felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Any doubt he might have had about his decision vanished completely. You're right about one thing, Victoria, he said calmly. People will see me for what I really are. Dorothy's son. And I couldn't be more proud of that. Victoria stared at him for a long moment, seemed to realize she had lost completely, then turned and stalked out of the kitchen without another word. As her footsteps faded away, Marcus sank into the chair next to Dorothy, suddenly feeling exhausted. The woman who had raised him reached over and took his hand in both of hers. I'm sorry you had to see that side of her, Dorothy said softly. I know you loved her. Marcus looked at the woman who had given him everything, who had been treated like nothing by the person who was supposed to share his life, and realized that he was about to learn something new about himself, and about what really mattered when everything else was stripped away. Marcus sat in the quiet kitchen, holding Dorothy's withered hands in his own, listening to the sounds of Victoria's angry packing echoing from upstairs. Every slamming drawer and closet door felt like a weight lifting from his shoulders, but he couldn't shake the guilt that settled heavily in his chest. I'm so sorry, Dorothy, he said quietly. I did this to you. I bought you this house and then left you vulnerable to someone like Victoria. I should have been here. I should have protected you. Dorothy squeezed his hands gently. Baby, you couldn't have known. You were building something beautiful, something I always knew you were capable of. I wouldn't change that.